Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite films of all time, and apparently one of Kurt Cobain's favorite films of all time. And that is Over the Edge from 1979. So this is a new Shout Factory Blu-ray, the new Shout Select disc. This movie has been released one other time on Blu-ray a few years back from Arrow Video. This was an all-region Blu-ray from Arrow. Lots of extras on both. Some from this that go to this, but not everything. So I'll go through that in a little bit. But what is this movie? It is a story of teenage rebellion. It is based on, apparently, some news articles that came out in the San Francisco Chronicle in the early to mid 70s. I think the article was entitled Mouse Packs, and it was about a town, I want to say Foster City. I may be misremembering the name, but a town outside of San Francisco near the airport, if I recall, where it was like sort of a planned community, and the only problem, well, not the only problem, one of the big problems they had was they planned for children, you know, in terms of playgrounds and things like that, but they didn't really plan for teenagers. So ultimately, the teens in this planned community, this suburb, had nothing to do and took to vandalism and drugs and just were generally out of control. And so there was this whole article about these mouse packs, as they were called. And this is something that was observed by Tim Hunter, who is a filmmaker I adore, who made the film River's Edge, another Edge movie. In fact, Over the Edge is unique because in terms of Pure Cinema Podcast, my show with Elric for the New Beverly, one of our only live events we've ever done was after a screening of Over the Edge at the New Beverly. So this is a movie that's very special to us. But yeah, it's written by Charlie Haas and Tim Hunter. Tim Hunter was working as a film professor at UC Santa Cruz, I believe, at the time. Charlie Haas was one of his students, and they ended up collaborating on this script. And Jonathan Kaplan, the director, is a director I'm a big fan of, and he did things like, he worked with Roger Corman to start with. So he did, I want to say, like, what was it? Summer School? Night Call Nurses. That was his nurse movie. He did a movie called The Slams with Jim Brown. He did Truck Turner with Isaac Hayes, which is one of my favorite blaxploitation films. He did this movie White Line Fever, which connects to Over the Edge. Trucker movie with Jan Michael Vincent. And, he'd go on to do The Accused with Jodie Foster. I think Over the Edge might have been a factor in her decision to hire him for that. Project X, Bad Girls, Broke Down Palace, Heart Like a Wheel is a really nice one. Student Nurses, I forgot he did 2 nurse movies. Student Teachers. He did a teacher's movie and a nurse movie for Corman. So he cut his teeth with Corman and learned his craft there, and is among my favorite directors to come out of the Corman school, if you will. So he has this really interesting success with White Line Fever. Apparently, in one of the features, he talks about, he made it for Columbia, and it got sold to television, and I think it ran either after a World Series game or a baseball playoff game, and got like an incredible viewer retained a bunch of viewers. It was a big hit on TV. And so when this script found its way to producer George Lido, who had done Drive-In, which is a really interesting movie that's actually playing at the New Beverly in April, and would work with Brian De Palma, he saw this as a potential that he could sell to TV, and he was able to get some of the budget for the film by pre-selling to television. And seeing that Kaplan had success with White Line Fever, it became suddenly a viable option to consider him for directing. Now, the issue with the film is it's all about a bunch of teens who are, as this sort of articles indicate, they're board in this planned community. It is called New Granada, and it doesn't, they have a rec center, but they really don't have a lot for these kids to do. And so, yes, these kids start getting into drugs and vandalism and other not so great activities. The film is headlined by a really great young actor at the time named Michael Eric Kramer. He plays a character named Carl. And his parents are played by Andy Romano and Ellen Gear, and his dad sells Cadillacs. But he's friends with some less than reputable kids. One of them played by Matt Dillon in his first role. He was discovered during like a general casting search. One of the casting directors was at a high school in New York, and I guess he had been kicked out of class or he was roaming the halls, like he had been smoking in the bathroom and gotten himself in trouble, and was like legit this kind of kid, you know what I mean? And he's very much, it's not like he's playing himself in the movie, but like he feels like he probably was at that time, and it's a real great performance from him. So he and Carl are friends, and there's some other kids that are friendly with this group, and it's kind of them hanging out, them going to parties, them getting in fights, them being pursued and persecuted by the local law enforcement guy. His name's Doberman, or his nickname is Doberman. He's played by Harry Northup, who is in a bunch of Scorsese films, and he's very good in this movie. And in fact, he was at the Over the Edge screening that we did at the New Beverly. It was really neat to see him there. He's a great character actor, and he really does have a prominent part in this, and that he's coming after these kids all the time. He more or less arrests Matt Dillon's character and Michael Eric Kramer's character in just about the first scene. The first scene is a couple kids, including a young Vincent Spano, who's also in this, shooting some cars from an overpass and hitting a cop car and causing this big accident, and then running away. And then as they're running away, they zip by, Richie and Carl and say, "Hey guys, cops are coming." So Richie and Carl duck behind like a high voltage, little box, and Doberman finds them, and he's like, "What are you guys hiding from?" And Carl's like, "I lost a contact lens." And he's like, "You don't have contact lenses." He's like, "I lost them both." So he take him downtown. But so the idea is that, Richie is kind of a no good character. He comes from a broken home. Carl could be okay, but you have to sort of wait and see. But so it's a really great portrait of these kids. They're actually in junior high. They're not even in high school. And the end is a pretty epic, destruction of property. I don't want to give it away for those that haven't seen it, but it's a pretty crazy, a pretty epic ending. And yeah, so it's kind of their day-to-day at school, them struggling with the townsfolk being down on the way the kids are behaving, etc. Him sort of Carl himself being really interested in this girl named Corey, played by Pamela Ludwig, who had done some acting. But there's a lot of young kids in here that were hired, I think, out of the area that they were working, which was in, I think, Colorado. And then, they brought these kids in, and it's got a real authenticity to it that I really appreciate. And the soundtrack is really pretty great stuff. I mean, there's Cheap Trick, the Ramones, the Cars. I mean, it's a really wonderful soundtrack album that was at the time pretty cutting edge, pretty like, this is what the kids are listening to now. And that really helps the movie along and helps with its cult status, I think. But yeah, a really great film for me. Again, one of my favorites, one that's grown on me, has a really haunting ending. And I was so excited when this Arrow Blu-ray came out. The only thing that I would say I was a little not disappointed, but was hoping for, is that this is just a 1080p transfer, and it looks pretty good. But one of the big selling points of this new disc is that it is a brand new 2K scan from the Inner Positive. And so this does look better than the Arrow Blu-ray. I don't know about not Blu-ray DVD different, but it definitely looks better to me. Colors pop a little more. It's a very nice scan. So, like I said, a great cult film. Now, what's included here is well, I'll go through everything basically. You've got a ton of extras on this disc here, and there's 3 new featurettes. My only slight reservation is, and I guess this is just a pet peeve of mine. They heavily use feature footage to cover these interviews. These are basically Zoom interviews, and I don't know about you, but like I actually don't mind seeing a Zoom interview. Like I could watch a Zoom interview with a couple clips and be fine, because I just kind of like to watch people telling a story. But the need to cover these with so much feature footage when I've either just watched the movie or I'm gonna watch the movie kind of makes it a little bit annoying, because it's like, I don't know, it just feels repetitive in a way. I'd prefer like behind the scenes stills or lobby cards. I know that stuff obviously has to be licensed, so I know it's not as easy as just, oh, I'll just use something else, but that's a small reservation. So you have 3 new featurettes here. You have one called Watch Out for Children, Making Over the Edge, which is a new interview with director Jonathan Kaplan. It's about 16 minutes talking about the script based on the articles, the White Line Fever story, basically, George Leto and, him getting the script, and talked about directing and goes into casting and shooting. And so it's a nice little story of the making of the movie, and I like Kaplan a lot, so it's great to see. Some of this stuff I've heard before, some of it is repeated in other extras, but it's nice to see him again talking about this movie. So that's one that's brand new. And then you have one called Coming of Age, Writing Over the Edge, an interview with Charlie Haas, the screenwriter, and that's where I got some of the information about Tim Hunter, lecturing at Santa Cruz, and apparently he was doing these like Hollywood film classes showing Howard Hawks films and other old Hollywood stuff. And Haas and some of the other students there started taking these classes, and it really galvanized them and their interest in cinema, and was how he connected with Tim Hunter and how they ended up working together, writing the film based on these articles. Talking about how he and Kaplan ended up sort of chaperoning these kids on like the bus. I think they used buses to get them to and from sets, and that they would hear slang from these kids on the buses, and that was then sometimes incorporated into the script, which is another part of the authenticity of it, which may feel dated to some now, but I really do feel like it feels real in a certain way in terms of this is how the kids talk. And that's another thing Kaplan brings up in his interview, is when the kids would do some of the dialogue, they would like laugh at it, and eventually they were a little timid at first, but eventually they started to express like, this isn't how we would say it, and he's like, look, put it in your own words. And I love it that a director, I've heard other directors say that they would do this, but I think it's the best way to get an authentic performance and have, especially in terms of kids, to make it feel like something that you believe. And so that really worked. But yeah, neat little interview, 17 minutes with the writer Charlie Haas. And then another new one called My Father Told Me, Scoring Over the Edge, which is another interview with Jonathan Kaplan. Of course, his father, Saul Kaplan, scored the film. This is about 14 minutes long. And, his dad was blacklisted, and interestingly so was Tim Hunter's dad, who was a screenwriter. And so they have that. And there's some interesting blacklist overlap here in terms of the history of a couple of the filmmakers. But so his dad was blacklisted, and he had gone to school with like Leonard Bernstein. He was going to be a concert pianist. But he ended up scoring a film in the Army, I think, and ended up connecting with Alfred Newman at Fox and started working with Fox. But then that's when the blacklist happened. And by the time the blacklist was ending, The Graduate was coming out. This is Kaplan talking. And the studios were moving away from traditional scores, and basically they were looking at soundtracks. The Graduate had a great soundtrack with, the Simon and Garfunkel songs and stuff like that. So they were looking for that stuff now. And so it was kind of a bummer for his dad, because the scoring he couldn't do what he had been doing, basically. But so he gets his dad on board to score this film, and it's a really interesting and unusual score in that it's not like your normal orchestral. It's a little more experimental in some ways, and Kaplan says it's basically the score is the subtext of the film. It's very melancholy, and a lot of things that are happening to these kids are pretty sad, in terms of their lives, and they're fighting with each other. They're not getting along. There's a sadness there, and the score sort of represents that. And it's a very interesting score, and I think an interesting complement, too, to the soundtrack. But it's really neat to hear him talk. He also talks about the soundtrack here as well, and wanting to get certain songs, one of them being Baba O'Reilly, a.k.a. Teenage Wasteland, by The Who, for the end of the film. And for those that have seen the film, or they haven't, I guess, they end up using the song Ooh Child, which is covered by another artist I forget right now, but it's a very, very sort of beautiful version of that song. But Kaplan talks about how he would have liked to have used Teenage Wasteland, Baba O'Reilly, over the end, and it would very much change the ending of the film. It'd be a very different ending. And I think, as much as I always want the filmmaker to get what they, intended and see the vision they wanted, now that I've seen the ending as it stands, it would be weird to have that song there. It would just be, it would be cool, but it just doesn't feel the same way. So anyway, very cool to have these new featurettes added. Now, in terms of the stuff that's also on this Arrow disc, we have this Wide Streets and Narrow Minds, and it's a 7-part retrospective documentary. And it says, newly recorded, this is on the back of the Arrow disc, with cast and crew including Jonathan Kaplan, Tim Hunter, Charlie Haas, talent scouts Jane Bernstein and Linda Pfefferman, production designer Jim Newport, stars Matt Dillon, Michael Kramer, Harry Northup, Vincent Spano, Pamela Ludwig, Tom Fergus, Julia Pomeroy, and others. So this is, full pandemic, so they're getting all these over Zoom, but they were able to get basically the whole cast, the core kids and others involved. So it's a really great documentary with all these Zoom interviews and people recollecting their memories of the film. I really enjoyed that. So that's here, okay? Now, in terms of other stuff, we also have an audio commentary. This was new to the Arrow disc with Michael, Michael Kramer and journalist Mike Sachs, who'd written an article for Vice all about this movie and talked to a bunch of the people involved in the film. And that's a really great commentary just to hear Kramer's memories of the film, and a really cool guy, like a guy that I really dig, and I wish he did do some more acting. In fact, he did some more with Kaplan. He was in Project X, but he goes into, his career and how it sort of stalled and why that happened, as well as remembering, his stuff from the movie. So it's a really great commentary, and he has a lot of insights about specific scenes and things. So that's really great. And then the other commentary, which came from the Over the Edge DVD, with Jonathan Kaplan, producer George Leto, and screenwriters Charlie Haas and Tim Hunter. So that's a really great track that goes back to the DVD. That's here too. That's on this Shout disc. There's an isolated music and effects track, and then something called Destruction, Fun or Dumb, which is the full educational video excerpted within the film, it's a sort of hilarious anti-vandalism movie that they show the kids, but the kids actually get really excited about it. So that's here, and that was on the Arrow disc. Now, what's missing that is only on this Arrow disc is a full post-film Q&A from a 2010 screening at the Walter Reed Theater in New York, which I have a friend that was at this screening, and I'm very jealous of that. But this is a really cool, extra. It's a lengthy Q&A with George Leto again, Tim Hunter, Charlie Haas, Jane Bernstein, Harry Northup, Michael Kramer, Pamela Ludwig, Tom Fergus, and Julia Pomeroy. So again, you're getting some overlap with some stories, but I feel like there's always a little tidbit here and there that's new. So it's a bummer that's not on this Shout disc, but you can't have it all. Also included on the Arrow disc is excerpts from the Projection Booth podcast on the film, including interviews with Charlie Haas, Tim Hunter, Vincent Spano, Harry Northup, and Andy Romano. And then something called Welcome to New Granada, the full rock operetta by Drats, which is a rock operetta inspired by the movie. So that's all only on the Arrow disc. So if you're me and you love this movie, you have to keep both of these, which I'm going to do. But yeah, this is a really great, disc for folks that didn't pick up the Arrow disc from a few years back. If you're a fan of Over the Edge, this is going to be well worth your time, and you're going to want to own it. It's, like I said, a great cult film that I discovered through Danny Perry, actually, and his Cult Movies books originally, but has really come to be an all-time favorite of mine. And now that I have my own teenage child, certain things become more relevant. I'm not dealing with a child like these kids, but you see certain drama that applies, and it becomes more resonant as you get a little older and you're a parent. So it's a different take. But anyway, great disc. Hats off to Shout Factory for doing a nice job with this release, and highly recommended. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.